Welcome to History 112, Lecture 33, Minorities and World War II. Based on the experiences of World War I, the largest black union, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, is going to start off World War II demanding that the government ensure that companies that receive defense contracts do not discriminate, and they plan a 100,000-man march on Washington, D.C. Now, they're persuaded to cancel that march in exchange for the establishment of the Fair Employment Practices Commission. And this commission's successes were limited and enforcement was often weak, but it was important symbolic victories and a lead to public debate on the issue. Now, one of the side effects of that is there's quite a lot of propaganda produced that goes directly against racism and racist attitudes. And here we have a cartoon by Dr. Seuss where he's trying to illustrate that racism is harming the country. Another important impact on the African American community is that the expansion of wartime industry is going to lead to more factory jobs being available, and that's going to lead to more blacks leaving the South and moving to the North than the Great Migration had done. Now, conditions in the northern cities are going to lead to race riots in 1943, and CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, is going to mobilize to put pressure on agencies to try to end segregation and win some important small victories. And these victories are going to lay the groundwork for a lot of their civil rights work about a decade or two later. Now, the U.S. military is also going to begin to phase out segregation due to a manpower shortage, and the military during this time period begins to see segregation as wasteful and inefficient, and they start to work on actually ending it, although the official end to segregation is going to come just after the war ends. For Native Americans, on the other hand, there were some opportunities, like a large number of Native Americans served in the military, in particular the Northern Navajo Code Talkers, who were very important in the War in the Pacific. Now, about 70,000 are going to leave reservations seeking work in war industries, and for a lot of these individuals, this is their first taste of capitalism and materialism, and some decided to stay in those cities, whereas others were forced to return to the reservations when wartime employment opportunities faded away. Unfortunately for this community, the emphasis on wartime national unity tended to erode tribal autonomy that had been encouraged since 1934. For Mexican Americans, the war led to considerable expansion of economic opportunity. Now, before the Great Depression, Hispanics have been effectively limited to menial jobs in agriculture, and during the Great Depression, there have been a very active effort to try to push these individuals out of the economy. But with the coming of wartime and the vast expansion of factory work, this means that industrial jobs and decent jobs become available to this community for the first time. In addition, there's such a shortage of workers that the Bracero program begins, and this is an agreement between the United States and Mexico which allows U.S. companies to recruit workers in Mexico and bring them to the United States. Now, this is going to mean there's a large migration to cities and the creation of overnight Hispanic neighborhoods. And one of the negative consequences of this is going to be that there's a Zoot Suit riots emerging, and these are going to be the worst race riots in American history. Now, for most immigrant groups, there was not a big backlash like there was in World War I, but conspiracy theories of Japanese Americans aiding in Pearl Harbor attacks are going to lead the government military to see them as a threat. And Roosevelt is going to issue Executive Order 9066 in February 1942. Now, while the order is theoretically targeted at just enemy aliens, the application of it becomes very much aimed at the Japanese. Because this order allowed the armed forces to establish military zones, and within those military zones, the armed forces had the power to force people to leave them. And enemy aliens could be interned under this particular order. Now, a few hundred Germans and Italians are going to be interned or have their movements restricted, and this is kind of where the application becomes very skewed, because in 1942, Roosevelt creates the War Relocation Authority to move Japanese citizens to relocation camps for monitoring. So while it's a few hundred Italians or Germans, most of the people who are targeted by this particular executive order are of Japanese descent. And most people of Japanese heritage on the West Coast are going to be moved out of the West Coast into these camps, and many Japanese are going to lose their homes and their businesses as a result. Now, these camps are going to be harsh and uncomfortable, and the whole idea is being sold to the public as places where Japanese could be Americanized. And it was very similar in language to the way the government had talked about reservations. Now, there are going to be some who are going to call for harsher measures against these people, but the government generally resisted those. The governor of Utah, for example, wanted to use Japanese Americans as forced labor. Now, the WRA instead is going to allow these individuals to take up jobs if they wish to do so on some of these projects. Now, by and large, most people have forgotten about the issue by 1943, and that's around the same time the conditions are going to begin to improve, as some of the Japanese are allowed to go to college or take jobs on the East Coast. Now, there are going to be some legal challenges to this, and in 1944, the Supreme Court hears the case Korematsu v. U.S., and unfortunately, they're going to rule that this was constitutional and justified by the needs of the war. Now, by that time, most of the internees have been allowed to leave and the issue kind of faded away. Although later presidents are going to revisit this issue, apologize, and pay reparations to the survivors, and go ahead and issue some official statements that the United States now believes that what had been done was in fact wrong. An important side note to the issue of Japanese internment was the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. This is an all-Japanese unit that fights in Europe. The majority of these were volunteers from draft-age men in the internment camps, and they become the most decorated unit in the history of the U.S. Armed Forces, and 21 of these individuals win Medals of Honor. A lot of the people who volunteered believed that they had to be the best in order to win respect for their community. And they're going to go fight to prove how American they are, and they see this as the best way to stand up in circumstances where they and people like them have been locked away in these internment camps. Unfortunately, for these individuals, they're going to return to the United States as second-class citizens, and in the short term, their accomplishments are going to be largely ignored. Now, for Chinese Americans, the war is generally positive. Because of the American alliance with China, the social and legal position of many Chinese Americans is going to advance. In 1943, for example, Congress repeals the Chinese Exclusion Acts and begins to use pro-Chinese propaganda. Now, many Chinese Americans are going to take jobs in industry or going to be drafted in the military, and that's going to help them move out of ethnically segregated neighborhoods into the mainstream American life. And one of the positive effects here is that more people begin to work side by side with various minorities and get to know them as people. A lot of the racist attitudes that existed begin to slowly recede, and we do see the beginnings of some long-term trends that are generally positive there. So what's the big idea here? Well, for most groups, the wartime needs mean a dialing back of segregation and discrimination and official government support for doing so. However, poor treatment is going to lead to race riots during World War II. On the other hand, important victories are going to be one that are going to be built on during the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. But remember, importantly, Japanese Americans are going to suffer the worst discrimination. They're going to lose their homes and businesses and be locked away in internment camps. And this is going to be one of the great tragedies of World War II. See you in the next lecture.